And finally, Elizabeth Mills, originally a South African, and I'm sure that'll colour you.
Still a South African.
Yes, but you're welcome here, I think that's my point. Who runs the Sexuality, Poverty and Law programme at the Institute for Development Studies, which happens to be situated in the University of Sussex, of which I used to be chairman, so I'm rather keen on associating the two things. Elizabeth's going to talk really about that programme, aren't you, and particularly look at questions of sort of social exclusion and the related economic consequences and so on and so forth. And then we will have some questions, and I've got some here.
All right, I've got a presentation. Can I?
Oh my God, PowerPoint and everything.
Aha.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
You're a bit of a dauntingly large audience, but I'm very pleased to see so many people come. Sorry. Is it possible for me to sit back at my table? Yes, absolutely. And can I take this mouse to click through?
I think we have a click.
Oh, cool.
Should work.
I was just thinking, my background is in HIV, and I was just thinking about how 10 years ago, I remember the Ugandan government was providing antiretrovirals and being very sure that in providing antiretrovirals, they weren't providing condoms as well, because that was considered to be promoting sex. So, I mean, I think the role that donors can play in affecting our very embodied well-being has got a long history, and something that we certainly need to be very careful in and conscious in our work with donors. But yes, I would say short answer, I would agree with Sunil, is yes, absolutely, donors can work with us to support LGBT rights. The question is how, and I've got 7 minutes. And there's no way.
You've got 6
I've
now.
got 6 now. So I'm just going to jump right onto my conclusions.
Just say thank you and that'll do. Yeah.
All right, no, but seriously, I'm going to go to my conclusions. I've got 3 conclusions, and then I'll tell you, if I've got time, how I think we can do this. All right, first of all, I think we need to identify strategic entry points. And historically, we understand that in order to promote LGBT rights, we can go through HIV as being a strategic entry point in terms of providing healthcare, and human rights is another strategic entry point. But we know, we're sitting here today, we know that that's really not worked as well as it could have worked. We need to be thinking in creative new ways. We need to be agile. And so what the program is doing that I lead, and what many, many people around the world are arguing, is that we need to be thinking about economic entry points. We need to be thinking about not only the moral argument for human rights as such, linked to LGBT rights, but the material implications for people whose rights are not enshrined in the Constitution, in the law, and implemented through the various different enforcement agencies. Can you all hear me? Because I'm kind of feeling a bit breathless. Get closer to the mic. Right, so my first point is on entry points and the fact that we need to be thinking about economic entry points in a more sustainable way. And that certainly is the work that we're doing through the Sexuality, Poverty and Law program. We are working to develop an evidence base that shows the relationship between poverty, multiple forms of inequality, and sexuality. And we do consider sexuality rather broadly. We're focusing largely on sexual orientation and gender identity, but we're also looking at sexuality as it is intersectional. I can come back to that if you want me to clarify any more. Next point. We also need to be generating evidence on these entry points, and we need to be monitoring the evidence that we generate in order to show donors how best to be directing their funding most strategically with the partners they're working with. It's very, very difficult to measure how funding goes into LGBT programming, where it's effective, why it's effective, how it's effective. And I think that this meeting, the incredible range of people in this room, and certainly the different partners that we're working with, can perhaps offer some scope for us to start systematizing the information that is rather disparate around the world about what is actually working in terms of aid funding. And thirdly, and really importantly, solidarity and partnerships. Nothing for us without us. We need to be working together. And I agree completely with my colleagues here that it's a false binary to say it's the West versus the rest, or to speak about the infringement of rights as happening in Africa and not also happening in Russia, for example, or in subtle ways in social relationships in our own UK. So those are my 3 points: solidarity and partnership, identifying what works and developing an evidence base, and considering economic entry points as an additional way to start looking at ensuring the rights of LGBT people.
Thank you very much indeed, Elizabeth. There are a number of points here.
Have I run up my time?
Yeah, I think so.
I think I've got a bit more time.
Do you want a bit more time?
Yeah.
Oh,
now
okay.
I can start my presentation. Right.
I'm going to give you 2 minutes.
All right, so
and we're already eating into biscuit time.
Sorry. Okay, we know the law matters. I'll move straight on. Why does it matter? Well, because it affects whether or not women can access contraception. It affects whether or not we can access abortion. It affects whether or not lesbian and bisexual women are considered in sexual and reproductive health and rights policies. It affects whether or not those who do not conform to sexual and gender norms are able to access employment. We know that in India, in Nigeria, in South Africa too, I'm afraid to say, in Uganda, and as I mentioned in Russia, we have a whole spate of infringements on LGBT rights that we do need to be working really hard to address. And we need, and we can, indeed, be working with donors to do this. I suggest that we have a 3D approach to making rights real. First, direction. I would argue that we probably need to be marking a slight shift in our direction from emphasizing rights to looking at economic rights and economic entry points, and I've mentioned that already in my conclusion. Second, distribution. Where are the resources going? We have fantastic development programs, but if those programs and the benefits of those programs around employment, around housing, around education, are only reaching those people who have capital, social capital, in those societies in which aid is being directed, are accessing those resources, we're missing a whole section of the population because of their sexual orientation, and that does need to be addressed. For example, Angeline from the Philippines, in a policy audit that was written as part of the program I run, said, from the very beginning, I wanted to put her as my beneficiary, referring to her partner. I applied in 2011. I was told that I could not put my partner as a beneficiary because she was just my live-in partner, and this was a beneficiary for Social Security. Besides, she was also a woman, just like me. And thirdly, the third D in the 3D approach to how we can work with donors is that there are a great range of different actors and corresponding actions that we can engage with. Religious leaders, health providers, activist coalitions, faith-based organizations. Last week, a Paramount chief contacted me and said, in Sierra Leone, and said, we'd really like some training on sexuality in Moyamba, which is an incredibly rural part of Sierra Leone. And we'd like to do it with Men Engaged Network, which is a network across Africa. And so we're looking into developing a training manual and working with traditional leaders in Africa through the Men Engaged Network. And this came from the Paramount chief. Local politicians, police officers, and also the private sector. Thank you.